Military prosecutors are seeking the death penalty for Fort Hood shooting suspect Major Nidal Malik Hasan. The military has not executed an active duty service member since 1961. So is the military justice system ready for Hasan's trial? What are the biggest roadblocks for prosecutors? Stephen Karns is a former major in the U.S. Army JAG Corps. Thank you very much for talking to us. First of all, what does it say to you that the Army chose to file the murder charges against Hasan in military court rather than in a civilian one?
No, I don't think it really has crossed their minds to file it anywhere else. Once they determined that he was a lone gunman, it makes complete sense to file it there in military court.
All right, I want to address the issue of Hasan's mental responsibility because, as you know, his attorney, retired Colonel John Galligan, has been hired by Hasan's family to defend him. And he said that the Army psychiatrist, who was paralyzed, he believes, from the waist down, that former colleagues described Hasan as sometimes seeming mentally unstable. But you say that his lawyer has already made a huge mistake if he intends on arguing his client's mental instability. What is it?
Well, I think it's very interesting that from the beginning he had already said that he thinks there might be some mental issues that played a role in Major Hasan committing these acts. So what that says to me is that he's already admitted that he's done it. Now, that may be a non-issue because of the evidence, but what I read this morning in the Dallas Morning News is that he said his client completed a power of attorney. The only way that you would complete a power of an attorney or have your client complete that is if you thought that he was mentally competent. So what happens is you can't have it both ways. I mean, I think it's important, obviously, to get your client evaluated, but I think that you got to play your cards or keep your cards close to your chest at this point because it's an uphill battle. So it doesn't make sense that on one hand he's saying he's mentally incompetent or possibly mentally incompetent, but the next thing you know, he's announcing to the press that he's having him do a power of attorney.
So mental competency can come into play in two different ways. First, is he mentally competent to stand trial? And second, was he mentally competent the day that he allegedly pulled out 2 handguns after buying them because he was not licensed to carry a gun there on the property and fired at 13 of his comrades? I mean, how will the lawyer then prove that he perhaps was not mentally competent if he's going to try to do this? Not mentally competent the day he allegedly fired those rounds and killed 13 people. But he is competent today because, as you say, he just signed a POA, and you can't sign a power of attorney if you're not mentally competent.
Well, I think what was already been shown is that he's basically formed a strategy that what he's trying to do is just trying to keep his client alive. Instead of focusing so much on whether he did it or didn't do it, what he's already turned his case towards or his strategy towards is trying to keep his client alive. And as a practical matter, that's oftentimes what happens in these death penalty cases, is that it's a foregone conclusion that the person did it. So what you try and do is you try and keep your client alive, and that's where the victory is probably going to be in this case. Not in getting an acquittal, but in trying to keep your client alive.
All right, let's talk about his sentencing. If he's convicted, no active duty troops have been executed in nearly 50 years. The Army intends to seek the death penalty in the Hasan case. Do you think that the military is up to the task to get this death penalty if Hasan is executed swiftly?
Well, yes, I think the military is up to task. I mean, they did have a recent conviction in the Akbar case at the beginning of the Iraq War. He threw the grenade in the tent, and they prosecuted him for that, and he received the death penalty. Now, he's at the first court, first level of appeals on that case. But just to let you know, the President Bush has signed off on to execute Gray, which is a case from a while back, and he has signed off on that case. And then the Gray's attorneys have filed a writ in the federal district court in Leavenworth, Kansas. And so the wheels are turning. They're just turning very slowly.
Well, and that's my question.
See if the Gray execution takes place.
Why the years of legal wrangling to carry out justice? You just mentioned Army Sergeant Hassan Akbar. He was sentenced to death in a court-martial for rolling a grenade in a tent filled with U.S. soldiers in Kuwait back in April 2003. 4 years after he was sentenced to death, his case is stalled, as you said, in the first appellate level of the courts. Why does it take so long, and does the court system, the military court system, need to change?
Well, I don't think that it needs to change, but there's a big difference between the military courts and civilian courts. The first difference is that a commanding general gets to decide immediately after there's a verdict in a court-martial case. The commanding general reviews the case, and the commanding general can throw out the case, say that they're going to dismiss the findings as far as guilt or innocence. They can reduce the sentence, and in fact, a general did do that in a Marine case and commuted a sentence from death to life. And so that element of the commanding general being able to review the case before it even gets to the appellate court is completely different than what happens in the state court. Now, the second thing that makes it different is that, you know, state courts have two appellate courts just like the military does, but in state courts, they don't take death penalty cases, they don't review them at the first appellate court. In other words, it skips to the state's highest court. And so if a state has two courts, just like the military has two appellate courts, it takes twice as long because in the military, they don't skip that first court. The death penalty cases go to that first court, and then if they can go beyond that to that second court. But just by adding that extra court in the military system, you've doubled the time that it takes for the military to hear its case. And I would say the third major reason why it takes longer is that the president gets to review the case or has to review the case. And that element does not exist in the civilian courts. All right,
Stephen Karns, thank you very much for talking to us. Greg.
Thank you.